Sometimes a game comes out to massive acclaim, and others are rightly flung onto the landfill with scorn. But there are those who, for one reason or another, never got the recognition that they should have. Maybe a game had a buggy start, it released at the wrong time, or was just otherwise overlooked in a crowded market. But in this series, we're going to shine a light on these titles and examine if they really did deserve their fate. This time, we're going to act in defense of Mass Effect Andromeda. To say the weight of expectation was sitting heavily on the shoulders of Mass Effect Andromeda is putting it lightly. Despite a rather clumsy fall over the finish line with the conclusion of Mass Effect 3, the trilogy was widely regarded as a superb and groundbreaking saga of character and choice that earned BioWare's space opera a slew of awards. 5 years in the making, Andromeda's birth was not an easy one. Despite the company name on the box, the majority of the development was handled by a newly created team working out of Montreal, while in Edmonton, the bulk of the company was hard at work making a start on a new IP that would later be revealed to be Anthem. The Eastern team was made up of a number of developers that had been responsible for the DLC for Mass Effect 3, but would they be able to build an entirely new title from scratch? Their initial plans were certainly ambitious, with the game originally envisaged very similar to Elite Dangerous and No Man's Sky, with thousands of procedurally generated planets for the player to explore during their time in the Helios cluster. Added to this mix was DICE's Frostbite Engine, which had allowed the likes of the Battlefield series to look phenomenal and had been accepted as a de facto engine of choice for Electronic Arts going forward across all its games. It was here that the first issues started to arise. Frostbite had been designed as an engine for fast-paced, first-person shooters, and while it could be ported to other titles without too much difficulty, most notably the FIFA series, it wasn't set up to be a useful engine for role-playing games. Indeed, it's telling that out of all the criticisms regarding the game, the shooting and vehicle mechanics, which were one of Frostbite's key features, had the fewest complaints from both critics and gamers alike. A number of systems that were needed to create a game like Mass Effect, where stats, character interaction and player choice were key, simply either didn't work properly, or didn't work at all. Going from the Unreal Engine to Frostbite had a knock-on effect to the rest of production. The struggles with adapting the ambitious project meant that most of the production time on the game was spent in research and development, as the team in Montreal tried to plug the leaks in a sinking ship, relying on outside help to bend and adapt the engine, as well as rely on other software to make up for its shortcomings. The biggest of these was the animation systems. Early footage of the game showed much higher resolution, better animated scripted scenes and dialogue, but the finished result came under considerable fire for the poor results. Gurning, strange run cycles, plastic faces, dialogue out of sync, and many other complaints came thick and fast once the public got to try it during the early release in EA's EA Access service. Hardly surprising then that this was the first thing to be patched upon launch. It wasn't all engine troubles though that plagued its development. Changes in the game's management and rumours of a massively understaffed development team ensured that tensions at the company offshoot were running high throughout most of its creation. Not helping too was the growing resentment that the parent company in Edmonton was supposedly trying to undermine their efforts. One of the biggest problems came when Casey Hudson, the man who had been helming the series since its inception back in the early 2000s, left, leaving the team rudderless until the appointment of series scribe Mac Walters. The pressures didn't end there though, as even though Walters was finally able to start pulling all of the threads together into something coherent, the launch date had been set by EA, and a trailer released to the public before they even had anything approaching a workable product. This maelstrom of issues finally resulted in the game more or less going back to the drawing board, and the bulk of its content being rushed through production within the final 18 months before launch. The dream of a procedurally generated galaxy was scrapped, and around 30 planets were created and populated with quest lines and collectibles before the bulk of these was scrapped down even further to just 7. A number of other game systems were reined in, including the animations, as there simply wasn't time to bring the content needed up to the same standard as what had been accomplished earlier, which resulted in the loss of visual fidelity across the board. Upon launch, scores of 6 and 7 out of 10 were very common, and despite BioWare's attempt to right things post-launch, a few months after it released, it was announced that there would be no more content being created for the single-player part of the game. Plot threads like the fate of the Quarian Ark were left dangling in the wind, as many people speculated that the game's lack of critical and commercial success would end the series permanently. It was, comparatively, a failure. Or was it? While there are a number of technical issues that still persist within the game over 2 years from release, including missing voice lines, loading glitches, and frequent pausing when planetside, the actual core of the game is very alluring. While the story of Shepard and their quest to save the galaxy is a big, bombastic piece of space opera, the story of the Riders is much smaller, and in a way more personal. You're not a soldier. You're not a spy used to combat and an expert in killing and infiltration, but rather you're an explorer and a pioneer. There is no real fate of the galaxy tale resting on your shoulders for most parts of the game, and instead there's a wonderful sense of reaching out into the unknown and being the first to find out what lies out there. In much the same way as the stories of wagon trains full of pioneers heading west across America in the 18th and 19th century still hold our imagination to this day, Andromeda tries to make you feel like it's you who's taking those steps. Starting between Mass Effect 1 and 2, it tells the tale of the Andromeda Initiative, a collection of species who are going to spend over 600 years in cryostasis, crossing the great cosmic void between the Milky Way and their new home in the Andromeda Galaxy. 4 giant arcs would ferry the humans, Turians, Asari, Quarians, along with other fan favourites like the Krogan, and upon arriving they would meet up with the Nexus, a massive space station that would serve as the game's central hub in much the same way that the Citadel served in the original trilogy. Upon arriving, the human Ark encounters a bizarre space phenomenon called the Scourge, and they would lose the man in charge of settling their new homes, Pathfinder Alec Ryder, the father of your character. Despite some training, Scott or Sarah Ryder, depending on your choice, isn't ready to step into the massive space boots that your father left behind, and a lot of what you do in the game is to try and live up to his legacy, create a future for your people, and then discover the plans of the tyrannical new enemy species, the Ket. As a character, you're almost constantly on the back foot and far more human feeling than before. Shepard was a blank slate of an experienced military soldier, whereas the Ryder siblings are more nuanced. They have doubts, moments of fragility, moments of levity, and they grow on you just as much as the other characters that make up your crew. You're not a hero, you're just trying to survive. This feeling of fragility extends to the rest of the mission structure. Aside from the friendly Angaran city on the planet Aya, everywhere is a blank canvas that you need to fill in the blanks on. The settlements that you place aren't bustling metropolises, but rather bare-bones outposts, the building blocks of cities yet to come, and the planets themselves aren't exactly welcoming of them, with the likes of the desert planet of Eladon forcing you to seek shade or burn in the scorching sun. Through the plot, it is possible to tame these environments by accessing vaults, atmosphere processors left behind by a long-gone species. Through this combination of adaptation and settlement, the game plays out more like a world-building simulation than a full-bore space saga, and while this was enough to put people off playing the game initially, it quickly becomes the game's strength, and by the end, there is a feeling of satisfaction from knowing you've been able to contribute to establishing a new civilization. Choices made along the way shape this too, and there is a deep sense of optimism that becomes very apparent. Yes, there are problems and things are broken, but there is always a chance to change, to start again for the better. In many ways, this is the game's strongest aspect, and almost a comment on the game itself. It is buggy still, and there will always be things that won't work, but it still wants you to have fun, and if you can make it past the first few hours, then you really do. You find yourself wanting more. You want to spend more time with your crew. You want to not only go out on missions raiding Ket bases, but also on the tiny little side quest that teaches you more about how they react to the things in life. You want to see more moments like Liam and the Angaran crewmate Jarl trade insults and cultural knowledge while half naked, or get into another pub brawl alongside the Krogan Drac just as much as you yearn for combat. As I said earlier, the combat and vehicle sections were unsurprisingly the strongest parts of the game. Driving the Nomad around feels solid and chunky, and a far cry from the floaty box the Mako was in the original. Shifting gear ratio to match the terrain, shooting forward using your boosters to fly off the edge of a cliff, and then peppering your jump jets to control your landing always feels tight and responsive. The addition of a lateral boost and jetpack when you're outside of the Nomad and in combat makes the rather clunky cover shooting from the original trilogy feel positively archaic. While at the start you are exposed and will need to stay behind something, as you progress and unlock new abilities, you'll soon find yourself flying about the battlefield, throwing out concussion shots, cloaking to get behind your enemies, and then slamming a singularity into them. It's a solid and mostly intuitive system that may have come from the need to include another multiplayer mode, but feels more at home than you think. The multiplayer aspect feels even more solid than in the version found in Mass Effect 3, although there does seem to be some issues with lagging netcode and a slight lack of variety in objectives. The core gameplay is a lot of fun, with co-op being front and centre. A game like this really doesn't need or want a multiplayer mode at all, but despite that, and the heavy-handed nature of the loot box system that is now synonymous with Electronic Arts, what is there is a lot of fun to play. Mass Effect Andromeda is in many ways like an endearing puppy. It may not obey your commands and poop on the rug every now and then, but it's still happy to be with you, and if you can get past the initial frustration, then playing with it will put a smile on your face. Recent hints from BioWare in a video released on N7 Day on November 7th, 2018, particularly from Casey Hudson himself, point to the fact that the series might still be moving forward with a new title. Maybe Andromeda wasn't the disaster people painted it at launch, but rather a wake-up call for the future of a beloved franchise. I guess time will tell. Well, thank you very much if you got this far. There's a new approach for the channel which has been a bit neglected over the past year, and I'm looking at doing more of these videos that shine a positive light on some of the whipping boys of the games industry. If you like them, and if you think that there's a game that you think has been treated unfairly, then please do leave a comment below and I'll do my best to do whichever ones I can. In the meantime, keep an eye out for the usual 60-second reviews and the live streams, which will be coming back soon. For now, be good to each other, stay positive, you're more awesome than you know. I've been Silent Palpatine, and I will see you next time.